Watch this. No way!
Hello and welcome back to the Cookie Jar Golf Podcast. I am Tom Mills and today I'm joined by Sam Williams.
Hello, Tom.
And special guest, Managing Director of Rocketyard Sports, Daryl Evans. Daryl, nice to have you on.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to getting under the hood with you fellas today. That sounds really bad, but I'm happy to get under the hood of the business of
that
golf.
Sounds really good, actually. I'm looking forward to it. Just to give our listeners a bit of a background into you, Daryl, I know previously you've worked with companies such as Firestart and TaylorMade, but if you could just give us a brief outline on who you are, what you've done, and what's brought you here today.
Yeah, sure. I probably shouldn't really be doing what I'm doing. I grew up in South Africa, arguably wrong side of the tracks. My dad definitely would have wanted me to be working in a factory. I probably would have ended up robbing cars for a living, but I somehow managed to work my way up to the cutting edge of the golf industry.
You look like you'd be a good sort of, Grand Theft Auto kind of character, actually, there, Daryl.
It's a good thing this is a podcast, right? Because, I'm a small, bald man with a little bit too much gruffly facial hair at the moment. So I probably look a bit hard as nails. But the truth is I'm a small guy with a big heart.
We'll believe you.
Yeah.
So what got you into golf then?
Well, my father played golf. So I ended up playing a little bit of golf with my dad. And then when I moved to the UK, so I moved over here when I was 19, I happened to work in a pro shop, and the pro there thought that I was semi-decent at golf, even though I wasn't very good at all. And he thought, you should become an assistant pro. And then I ended up landing a job up at the Belfry as an assistant pro. And that basically set me on the path to where I ended up today. And I'll kind of fill in a couple of gaps without dwelling too much on it. But from my time at the Belfry and doing my PGA training, I graduated quite highly for my training. So I finished second in the UK and Ireland. And when you're kind of in that sort of top 5, 6, 7, you get quite a lot of job offers around the world. And I ended up taking a job out in Dubai, which is where I really came onto the TaylorMade scene, which I only found out about a couple of years later or a few years later. And I helped install a TaylorMade Performance Center out there at the Four Seasons Resort at the time, which is Al Badia Golf Resort. And I came back to the UK, set up my own business, basically doing golf trips with golf pros abroad. That was going quite well. Got scammed out of some money, shit myself a little bit, thought, I'm a bit out of my depth here. So sold that and then bought into a golf academy instead. That was going really well. I had to sell that a little bit early because my dad wasn't very well in South Africa. So sold that, came back for a wedding. In fact, with one of your current guests or one of your other guests, Chris Trott.
Oh, Trotter, yeah, of course. Yeah.
So
you guys go back?
We go back a long way from Belfry days. And there was 2 best men for his wedding. And the other best man was prepared to read out my speech if I wasn't going to make it because of my dad not making it, so to speak, in South Africa. So in the speech, I then said, listen, hey, Badge, I just want to say thanks so much for volunteering to read out my speech if I couldn't be here. And just by saying that, freaking every guest after that speech just came up to me and said, what did you mean by that? And obviously it's quite emotional times. So it wasn't very easy. So all I ended up doing was just drinking more and more and more beer, which was great. And I was standing at the bar and there's this guy and he's asking me all of these really random questions about celebrities and golf pros and do I know any coaches? And my then fiance, now wife, she comes over and says, what are you guys talking about? And he says, well, I'm just interviewing young Daryl over here. So I looked at him and I said, who the fuck are you? And he said, my name in his Irish accent, my name is Ian Watson. I think you should come in and see me. And he worked at TaylorMade as a sports marketing director. And that set me on the pathway to working with the best players in the world. And I was very lucky and still am very lucky to be exposed to some of the best players in the world. I've been to some of the best places in the world, the things I've seen, the things I've done, the cultures I've experienced. And really the valuable part for me is the business end. And that's the bit that I was always interested in. It's nice to be able to stand out on the range and help out Dustin Johnson with his driver or, speak to his management team about this, that, on the next thing, about not necessarily about him, but other players and whatever it might be. But I was always fascinated by the business end of it. So the contracts, how the sponsorship and the marketing were interlinked, how they should be used, and how to really stimulate that along. So when it came time for me to leave TaylorMade, I needed to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my career, because, it's great working at TaylorMade and the exposure you get. And, it was a wonderful time. There's no doubt it's been the highlight of my career, my time at TaylorMade. But in order for me to develop and grow myself, I needed to expand, I suppose. So I went to go and work for a management company for a year to figure out what I didn't already know. And then through that experience, met the right people at the right time, which allowed us to set up Rocketyard Sports just a few years ago. And we've gone from strength to strength year after year, even in a pandemic, which is freaking surprising sometimes.
And you're representing a fairly broad spectrum in terms of athletes at the moment, aren't you, Daryl? But for our listeners who, and I think one of those, maybe if you're in sports marketing inside, it probably all makes sense. To the naked eye looking inwards, it maybe looks like everyone's an agent. So being deliberately provocative for you here, but kind of which players do you manage, so to speak? How does that nature work? Like you talk about Rocketyard, how does that differ from being like a typical sports agent, for want of a better term?
I think that's a good question, because although we do represent talent and we represent them commercially, which I'll expand on in a second, we are a sports marketing and a sponsorship agency, and we need to be able to look at the business of sport from a totally aerial view. So the people that are connected to the money, if you think about it from a business, is the rights holder. So let's call that a golf tour, like the European Tour. It's the brands. So let's say that's a BMW or a Rolex, or people that invest in those tours. And there's the players themselves. So if you have all three within your, portfolio, you will have the best possible view in terms of how to connect the dots from a business and commercial point of view. So the players that we represent, now we're going to be very specific about the players that we sign. We've turned down about 40 players already in the last 3 years, just because they need to highlight our brand in the right way. They need to fit our model the right way, because we are not managers. We're more likely to be agents. So we don't book travel. We don't do passports. We don't do the operational side of our players' lifestyles, if you like. We totally focus on the commercial aspects, which is contract negotiation, stimulating new opportunities, new partnerships, new relationships. That's the area of focus that we do, because that means we would do the same thing for the brands. We do the same thing for the rights holders we work with. It's all very, very, very consistent.
So is that something that the players come to you, some of the players you turn down, and they would expect that essentially that you would act as APA and sort their lives out, and is that what they're kind of, some of these players are expecting when they come to a marketing agency like yourself? Some
do, yes. I think it's, there are management companies out there. That's their job. That's what they do. They handhold the players. They fetch them their cups of coffee out in the driving range. They're always there for every press conference or, whatever it might be. For some players, that's a need, and that's great for some players. But that's just not where we think the direction of travel that this is going to go in the future of sports marketing and management. Think about it. The phone is changed the world. No doubt about it. When you talk about innovation in the world, the smartphone is that key device. And as more and more and more apps become available, the more the less need there is for some of those services from a management company. That's just how I see this. Now, I'm sure there's going to be a ton of management companies that are going to go, you can't say that, you can't do that, but that's just what I believe personally. And I've set up my business in a way that allows for that to happen. So if the player wants to book his own flights and he's got his Emirates Airlines app, great. If he wants to do his passports, great. If he wants to sort out his car insurance, we got McLaren Sport, we can put you in touch with those guys. And, whatever it might be, there's a route for that, which does not require 24-hour service, hand holding.
So what you're saying there, I think, Daryl, is, kind of you want to have a broad range of athletes, because those athletes will fit the narrative for different brands differently, right? So you wouldn't necessarily want 20 Carly Booths, or you wouldn't want 15 Adrian Otegis. What you want to have is one of each, because they each represent an ability to be a, to use your term, I guess, a kind of flag bearer for those individual companies, right?
100%. So because we're so connected to the marketing side, if we have 5 players that are the same, Imagine what that's like when you go into a conversation with a sponsor and you say, hey, look, we've got these 5 players. Which one would you like? That's not a great pitch, is it? So we need to be able to go in and strongly demonstrate the unique audiences of each of those athletes so that we can then provide multiple solutions. If that brand picks them all, great. If they pick 1 or 2, great, whatever. It has to fit the business. It doesn't fit the player, it fits the business. And that's how sponsorship works. So you're totally right. We only want to have one Carly Booth. There is only one Carly Booth. We only want to have one Adrian Otaegui. We only want to have one Chris Ryan, one Andy Wilson. All of these guys, Sean Murphy's, they're all specific in what kind of solution we would be able to present to a brand.
Is that where sports management's gone wrong then in the past then? So I'm not saying I want you to bag kind of competition or other businesses out there, but is that kind of something that's happened over time? Has it just become, I don't know, different larger firms just become a bit homogenized in terms of the players they're recruiting? Yeah,
I think, look, if you rewind the clock 15, I said clock then as if we were talking about Liverpool Football Club then. I meant clock. But if you rewind the clock 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago, the management company, you needed a management company because they knew everybody on a personal level that would get you to the right places. But in that space of time, and again, the smartphone and the apps, those connections and the route to those connections is getting shorter and shorter all the time. So that's less of a need. So at my time working at TaylorMade and working with all the players that we worked with at the time, players only have one problem with their management company, and that's it. Where is my deals? Where are my sponsorship opportunities? So that's the problem we have to go out and solve. Me fetching you a cup of coffee is not solving your problem for thirst. You can fetch it yourself. It's down the end of the driving range. That's how that works. Whereas for me, it's very, very difficult to attract partners, especially in the current climate with the pandemic. So would you rather me fetch you a cup of coffee, or would you rather me be on the phone trying to arrange a sponsorship opportunity for you? Most players are going to say the latter, aren't they? So the problem we're solving is to focus solely and in a more dedicated fashion that particular route.
So if we rewind slightly and you say that you represent more than just the players, and you've got sort of the tours and the brands and the players, and they all sit under this umbrella of things that you represent. Is your mission to connect people within the things you represent, or is it to understand the connections so you can do it better?
Well, the better we understand the connections, the deeper our relationships will go. So that means when we're problem solving for these brands, players, or rights holders, we're better positioned to be able to give them something that we know that they will need. You see, I'm going to kind of give you something really tangible here, which is more related to how players go about getting their own sponsorship deals. And this would be guys that are maybe developing. So young guys who are just starting out in their career. And I'll kind of show you what the example would be by telling you this sort of narrative. If you're a young guy, you're 22 years old, you just turned pro, and you need some cash now because you've got to pay for some entry fees for the first time because England aren't there to pay for them for you. You've actually got to go out and do it on your own, but you've got golf lessons to pay for. You got your physio, you got your flights, you got this, da, 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 da. So what most of them do, they go down the golf club and they go and find the wealthiest guy at the golf club. And they say to them, hey, Billy, big boy. So I'd like to talk to you about helping me out. I've got this, I'm the best player in the club and I really want to live out my dream because I'm passionate about my dreams. And, you could really be with me along this journey. And, I just need some help paying for my, golf lessons and some entry fees. I mean, that's just. It's
a bit of a weak sell when you hear it back, actually.
Yeah. Now, if you flip that on its head and you say, you teach these young guys. So we do this with an index. We have this like player index, which helps highlight to them how they can be sponsorship ready. And within that, they got to be learning about how to grow their social audience, how to develop a network with it, personal network, how to develop a mailing list, the usefulness rather of a website, their time, how they can use sampling opportunities to allow new sponsors into their environment so that their network can test out those products. If you listen to everything that I've said so far, the one thing that I haven't said yet is logo placement. Now, what players think, and a lot of brands think, is that sponsorship is logo placement. And that is just not even remotely close to the ballpark there. You're not even close when you're thinking on that framework. So with everything that I've said there now, imagine I'm the player and I go back in and say, hey, Billy, big boy, I want to talk to you about a sponsorship opportunity. And they're going to go, right, here we go, another charity case. And you then say, okay, I've got an audience of X. This is the demographic. This is the age range. This is what their household income is. This is how many cars they drive. This is what percentage will be changing their car insurance in the next 18 months. You're an insurance guy. I think this is a really, really good fit for you. Would you like to work with me in order to access my audience so that we can open you up to make new business? And by the way, the price of entry is $5,000. That's a much more compelling sell than saying, hey, mate, can you help me out for some golf lessons?
You've flipped it to a partnership from being what was essentially a favor-based thing before, haven't you? And it's weird because I think, I don't know, maybe we all look at these things with hindsight and it's easier, but when you're 22, the world never seems that straightforward, does it? And you just think, you're just more likely to follow the route of what the other boys that, you're playing regional golf with do. But, it's such a clear and obvious example when you say it out loud. And yet, 99% of players will go about it in the way you first articulated. It's crazy.
Yeah, I personally think that it's mental, but I also understand because it's like you said, it's a bit like, you have an Apple phone, your next phone is going to be an Apple phone. You kind of get into the lane. You never come out of the lane. So you never get the right exposure to understand how to pitch yourself. Too many players go on what their performances are, but actually, the way that we would do it, and I'll give you a really good example, when we start talking to brands, especially when it comes to talent or even rights holders, we'll go to the brand, we'll learn everything that we need to learn about what their marketing objectives are, what their commercial needs are, et cetera, et cetera. We then go in and we then say, okay, look, we're working with a few audiences here, and this is the audience data, and we kind of go through it all, and then they say, so whose audience is this? Oh, this happens to be Carly Booth's audience, or this happens to be Sean Murphy's audience. Oh, right, yeah, great. So we remove the emotional connection to it, and we make it business because this is business, really. It's okay. The one great thing about sport is that it is an emotional thing, and that's a wonderful thing. We should never lose that. But I think when you're making these decisions where you're looking to spend tens or hundreds or millions of pounds, you need to make sure that you're making calculated business decisions. And doing it on a whim is never going to be effective for anybody. It needs to be quite smartly calculated.
I've got a question that you may not be able to answer, but it's gone through my head before, so I'll ask it anyway. If we go back to your previous example with Billy Big Stuff and the guy who runs an insurance company.
Billy Big Boy. Billy Big Boy.
I do apologize.
Get it right, because you're never going to get $5,000 off Billy if you call him Billy Big Stuff.
Yeah, you're off to a bad start already here.
The question I've got, I suppose, is there's a player that's come and negotiated a contract with an insurance company, and say, for argument's sake, he gets £5,000, and that's what he's negotiated, and say it's a 1-year deal. How do you, as a management company, show that the talent has provided value?
That's a great question. This is a problem that we are currently trying to solve. So the key stat here is that 7 out of every 10 brands that invest in talent sponsorship want to end the contract early. That's mind-blowing, right?
So why does the first place?
Is that because the contracts are too long? Or?
No, it's because it's underserviced. So by both sides. So both sides don't understand the sponsorship. So what sponsorship is in my world? Sponsorship is the gateway to the audience. What you have to do once you're through the gate is you have to market to the audience, is how this works. So what brands will do is they will spend, let's use your example, they'll spend $5,000. Actually, I'm going to give you a real strong, tangible example. A friend of mine who, when he was a small boy, went to a Formula One track. And this was at a time when Marlboro sponsored the McLaren Formula One team. And he's walked into the garage with his dad, and the Marlboro guy is giving the McLaren guy a massive, massive bollocking for something. And he is absolutely ripping through him. And he says to the McLaren guy, the Marlboro guy says this, he says, I am spending $1 million a year with you for all this shit, whatever he was moaning about. And the boy then startled, says, $1 million? Oh my God, so much money. And he turns to the boy and he says, $1 million is nothing compared to the $10 million I'm spending activating this agreement. And that's the problem. So a lot of brands who are trying to move from advertiser to sponsor, they will give that player $5,000, $10,000, $100,000, whatever it is, and they'll put it all on the player to do everything. They don't understand that they've just paid for the entrance, the doorway. It's an entrance fee. That's what they've paid for. What the brand now has to do is stimulate that agreement with normal, traditional marketing means in order to stimulate that audience to attract new customers. So that's where the partnership really comes in. Sponsorship is the price of entry. Marketing is the way that you stimulate that audience. So what you've got to do at the end of a season, or realistically on a quarterly basis, when you're in these agreements, you should really be trying to put out some reports on activity to prove that your player has been doing what's been required of them in order to activate those agreements. What we try and do is we try and speak to all of our partners and sponsors and whoever they may be at least on a monthly basis. We've got to be on real good personal terms here, so that when we have these calls and discussions, we are talking about what kind of activations we can do for the following month. What's your plan? Are you releasing a new product in September, right? What kind of campaigns can we do around there that we can help stimulate, Sean Murphy's audience or Carly Booth's audience or whatever it might be? And that's how you got to go about it. Most agencies, and no, hang on, I nearly said something really bad there. What some agencies will do is they'll do the contract in the beginning of the year, and those brands won't hear from them till the end of the year. Those contracts are unlikely to be renewed, and that's the 7 out of 10. What we need to do is be the 3 out of 10, and for us, grow us to the 10 out of 10.
That's where you get that continuum, isn't it? Because when you're saying, and I'm not blowing smoke up your ass here, just for the sake of it, but where you say but you kind of say, your primary client here is the business that's using you to market their product, whatever that product might be. And you can see how in a simple world, the agent who's getting the coffee down on the range, they see their client as the player. So when the insurance guy or the Marlboro guy comes up and says, here's $1 million, it's like, brilliant, there's $1 million. Thanks for that. We'll catch up again in a year's time when I need another $1 million, or hopefully $1.5 million. And like you say, you haven't activated it. And you can see that because it's probably back to what you were saying earlier about logo placements. It's like, okay, I wear the product. It's on my badge. There we go. On to the next thing. Being in the position you're in, when you look around, who do you see that does that kind of activation piece really well? And I'm not going to let you use one of your own examples because I've already blown far too much smoke up past there. But, where you see it and you're like, yeah, they get it. What is it?
Well, a friend of mine, I suppose in some ways, is a bit of a mentor, really, a guy called Eric Mishkov. He represents Sergio Garcia. Now, Sergio, for me, is the pinnacle of excellence when it comes to understanding the value to sponsors. So he's been working with Omega and Adidas for more than 20 years. That's proper sponsorship. That's partnerships like to the highest level, because it's very difficult to attract new sponsors. So what you need to do is develop the relationship with the ones you've got, because it's much better to have long-term partners than ones that keep changing year after year. So I think how Eric and Sergio have done that and worked that relationship, and obviously they're all friends, the way they have a relationship that's beyond the scope of the agreement. But, Omega's purpose is to access Garcia's audience, and that's how this works. But their relationship is so intertwined and so deep, it's unlikely that it'll ever break. And that's where it'll always win in that sense.
So is it in terms of a brand? I mean, I know this is a very difficult question to answer, but are they expecting to see tangible increase in profit because of that sponsorship? Or are they looking, they're just thinking if we break even, that's okay? Or are they just thinking this is a good thing to be on board with?
I think every company will have a different metric for their ROI. And sometimes it's going to depend on the size, the quality of the audience, or perhaps the personality to a level of the talent and how interactive they are. When people talk about sponsorship, brand awareness is a very, very, it's like one of the first things that usually gets mentioned. And it's because sponsorship is heavily involved in brand awareness. There's a reason why the football teams have logo placement on the front of those shirts. Is because logo placement is a value add, I suppose, and there is an ROI that you can measure. So, for example, if you advertise in Today's Golfer magazine, I'm probably going to get these numbers wrong, but you'll see my point. You advertise in Today's Golfer magazine for a one-page A4 for $2,500, for example, and the circulation is 50,000 people. Well, if I spent £2,500 on social media advertising, my reach would be significantly more than 50,000 people. And I could possibly be even really be even more targeted through social media to attract the ones that are in the market to buy my product. So sponsorship and logo placement has a place in order to be able to influence people's perception. I'm actually reading a book about this at the moment, and how there's a phrase, I can't remember what the phrase is. I wish I could just tell you now. If the book is next to me, I'll be able to tell you. But it's basically about reinforcing that message regularly and a lot. So like Rolex, for example, believe in something called tsunami marketing. And it's kind of very smart. All they want to do is be seen as often as possible. That's it. So it doesn't matter if their logo is small or big. You know, they got their clocks on every tee or on the tennis courts, or they're everywhere. You see them all the time. You know, there's nothing on that.
Very subliminal.
Very, very subliminal. But what people then, over time, they then associate Rolex as premium. They associate Rolex, oh, right, yeah, golf and tennis, you know, those are exclusive sort of high net worth kind of sports to be associated with. And that's how they'll position themselves. And it's kind of smart when you think about it. But brand awareness you can measure that down to monetary value, because you can say, well, if I spend $2,500 in advertising in a magazine, and I wanted to reach 50,000 people, if I reach 50,000 people online and it cost me £1,000, then your ROI, I suppose, is another $1,500 on top, right? If you see the maths there. But there are other tangible ways. So you can do sampling opportunities, for example. This is something that BMW do really well at Wentworth. So when you go into the Tented Village, you can sample the cars. You can get inside, you can touch, you can feel, you can book test drives. You can do everything with the cars, and they'll do promotional offers that week to encourage sales. And they will definitely be selling cars that week. Absolutely no doubt about it. Amongst the players as well, they'll have player VIP deals. And I've benefited from a couple of those over the years as well. You know, they'll do these amazing deals that week and you pick up a BMW. Like, it's brilliant. It's really good. That's where the sponsorships really come in. You know, they have access to the audience. Great. I didn't see Ferrari there. So no one was buying any Ferraris, but BMW paid the price of entry via sponsorship in order to have that sampling opportunity in front of all those people that week to sell more cars.
And
so
then they activate it well. Yeah, exactly. You talk about social media a bit there as well. So we're going to obviously touch on this, but the players and their social media presence seems to be quite important, because they seem to do a lot. Even players who, you know, fundamentally don't need to. There's a lot of people, and you know, the reach they have is huge. And you know, we've also had people sort of approach us randomly through the sort of various different dark channels that exist out there that assist people with social media. And by the way, we have no involvement with those people. But they say that they support, you know, some serious players that sit on, you know, top level tours. And you think, is it really that important that a professional golfer elevates their social media presence? You think that can't be right. Like, surely it can't be that important. But clearly, that's a massive asset in today's game for players.
Well, if you think about it, like I said earlier, sponsorship is about accessing an audience. If you haven't got one, it's pretty hard to attract a brand for sponsorship. That's basically where you're at, right? So the more cultivated and the more refined your social media is, and the more engaged your audience is, the more likely you are to attract sponsorship. This is one of the key things about influencers that I find super fascinating. So you think about some of these tour players that are earning significant amounts of money, like hundreds of thousands of dollars worth, some of them into the millions potentially. And I'm talking about players probably outside the top 50 here. And then you compare that to a social influencer, some top social influence. Obviously, there's some good ones out there. You got Rick Shields, you know, Me and My Golf, Chris Ryan, a client of ours. You know, these guys are the top social influencers in the world who are commanding big audiences of 400,000 people up to, you know, I know Rick Shields is well over 1 million now, I believe. You know, that's a super, super highly engaged audience that never declines. It just keeps growing. So if you're a brand, this is what I think in my logic, right? If you're a brand and you want to sponsor someone and there are players on the tour that you can sponsor, you can never guarantee the engagement of the audience. If your player wins, oh my God, that's electric. The ROI of that is just phenomenal, you know, and we've certainly experienced that a lot over the years. And it's amazing when that happens. but you're almost gambling on that. You're spending your money and you're hoping that happens. And then that player comes through, fantastic ROI, everyone loves it, it's amazing, that's great. Social influencers can be super powerful and consistent because their audience always grows. They can sit down and open up a negotiation with a brand and say to them, look, I'm going to do a 3-series campaign for you because I believe in your product. I like what you're doing. And I'm going to guarantee you 30,000 views per video. And they say, all right, you can guarantee that? Yeah, I can guarantee. And if I don't get there, I'll do another video. Or what we'll do is we'll do this on a pro rata agreement where whatever view it is, you just pay me less. And they go, all right, okay, yeah, that'll work. That is super effective. So that's why social media is key. Now, imagine if you're a tour player and you have a big social audience, like Carly Booth is that person. So if she goes out and wins, freaking the world lights up. If she does something on social media, the world is still on fire. It's great. She's winning all the time in that sense. And that's where the power of social in sports sponsorship is really key. However, what I hear a lot of from players, I don't really want to work on all that. I'm here to play golf. I've got to concentrate on my golf. Yeah, no problem at all, mate. Absolutely, totally understand that. And I highly respect that. Just accept that you're probably not going to get as big as sponsorship deals. That's okay. Just so long as you know that, it's all golden. And that's the way that it will work. And what's happening with the pandemic is that it's magnifying that. It's making the brands look at social media more than they've ever looked at it before.
Do you find there is a difference between the deals that you can broker for players that have, there are clearly players that have a managed social media that they don't really have anything to do with, and then there's players that do it themselves. Does that change the way that you can broker deals, or does it not really matter? It's just subscriber numbers.
Well, the authenticity of the content that goes out to the channel is very important, to be fair. It has to be a natural fit. It has to reflect the person. We turned down quite a few deals, to be fair, with the likes of, say, Carly or Chris in particular, because of their social audiences, because they're products that A, they might not believe in, and B, they might be products that we can't authentically and naturally put into their channels either. It doesn't work. Like Carly Booth is a good example. How could we get McDonald's to sponsor her? Because she doesn't eat unhealthy. She eats healthily. And that's the lifestyle that she leads. She can't eat a McDonald's burger because it's not conducive to her audience. It's not conducive to her personality. It's not a logical fit. But if it was, like a protein or a grenade, a protein bar or whatever it might be, that's a lot more authentic because those are products she uses. It's what she requires to run her life. So the content that she'll put out will be a lot more natural as a result of that. But managed accounts, going to your point about managed accounts and when the players do it themselves, I understand why management companies would run the players' accounts. I really totally understand that, and especially with players that are underusing their social and they need some help and support. But it is always better if the player does it themselves. The authenticity, again, just shines through. Often it's quite clear to see. So we're quite active at trying to get our players to do it by themselves as much as possible, and we'll guide them on certain things and give them ideas on certain things. But it really needs to flow from what they feel is natural to them.
There was quite a funny thing. It's not funny at all, but it was coming out on Twitter. I remember I saw when the riots were happening in America. There was a player that put out a photo like, oh, really psyched about the Hawaii Open tomorrow or something, which was obviously like a timed, scheduled post. And it was so incongruent with everything that was going on. And I think, like the Twitter sphere just kind of took it apart as being, ridiculous. But that's the
you see it, don't you? Like, sorry to cut in, Tom, but on this podcast, we talk a lot about it. We kind of take dead aim on it and call it naked commercialism. And I think the epitome of that when I watch professional golf is that Aon risk reward hole. I don't see, now they internally would think that there's a synergy around risk and reward in the nature of their business, and they think they've struck gold by doing it. I think the fan that sits at home looks at that and just thinks this is just it is the epitome of naked commercialism. It's an ad that needs to be run throughout. It doesn't even seem particularly relevant to what I'm watching throughout the season. I'd even probably lump something like FedEx. That's just stick it. That's like your tsunami marketing, isn't it? It's just like, we're going to strike a contract. contract. We're going to put as much money in people's hands as possible, and we just want you to kind of stuff it down the audience's throat as much as they can take. And it's funny hearing you talk about how it works with partnerships, and kind of trying to look at things where it just fits in a bit more organically. I don't even think there's a question kind of within there. It's just more of an observation.
I think your FedEx example there as well, and some of the when you start getting into the sponsorship for rights holders like that, the tours, etc., or individual events, that you will see things like this leaderboard is sponsored by, or this water station is sponsored by, whatever. Those things. One, there's a cost-saving exercise to the rights holder for having those there, for sure. But equally, some of those brands that want to go, they'll do that for brand awareness. But what they might be trying to do is actually get access to the other brands. So in the hospitality village, or in that sort of community, in the pro-ams or whatever it might be, they're trying to infiltrate the key people at other companies so they can open up dialogue and therefore do business on a B2B basis, as well as to a B2C basis. So sometimes sponsorship isn't always about ramming down the logo placement or an ad down people's throats, although for some brands that's definitely there. Sometimes, some of their big brands are really trying to associate themselves with different scenarios. There's a big insurance company that we do a little bit of, I guess we've been talking to for quite some time now, and they only really have one goal. They're quite happy to do a lot of different types of sponsorship, but they have one goal, one objective, and that is wherever they go, they have to take over all of the insurance policies of that rights holder. That's it. So they're happy to spend, but we need all of that. And if we don't have all of it, then we're not going to be involved in the sponsorship opportunity. So that's it. Going back to the ROI question, that's where it comes into play. So they'll win because they'll win long-term contracts in insurance policies, but they'll also win because they're getting the brand awareness of their insurance business, branded up everywhere and whatever gets included in that kind of arrangement. So there's a bit more.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a really interesting take. Just flipping it over and looking at the kind of player stuff before we started recording, we were chatting, and I'm just curious, how much is the tour player at whatever level, because their earnings vary, right, enormously, in fact. How much is the tour player dependent on their endorsements and sponsorship programs versus, how well they play that season for the standard of living? That's quite hard. Again, as the outside looking in, it's like I can see how much a player's earning. That's really transparent. I get to look at that every weekend. I can see, Jason Scrivener, shot 7 under on the back nine in Abu Dhabi, and that made a significant leap from 100K's worth of prize money to 700K's worth of prize money. It's totally opaque then in terms of that endorsement. How much are they reliant on it, and kind of at what point does it start to sort of net each other off?
Well, I definitely think all players are reliant on their endorsement opportunities in whatever capacity. I know obviously the super rich just keep getting richer, so you could argue that they're not as reliant on it. But and I'll expand on this in just a second. But I think every player will have a reliance on it. Realistically, the lower ranked you are, the more you need your sponsorship. If we summarize it in priority order, even though every player needs it, the priority is the opposite way around. When you're starting out, that's when you need the cash, not when you're at the top. But there is a tipping point as well, because in your early years and as you become established and you become a European or a PGA Tour player, and most of your earnings are going to be what you do on the golf course, and you're also earning in endorsements, there does come a tipping point where your endorsements will start to overtake what you do on course earnings. And typically, just based on the information that I probably know, and I'm kind of taking a bit of a stab in the dark, but once you're at that sort of top 10 to maybe top 20 in the world, you're probably reaching that point where you're starting to edge into maybe making more money in endorsements versus on the course, roughly. It depends on the profile of the player. Some players at the top level are quite under the radar, and you might not really talk about them that much, even though they might be 11 in the world. And then there's other guys who are maybe 25 in the world and just take over the media all the time. So it depends on the profile of the player, of course. But I can definitely see that happening at that stage in their careers.
And do you see players come into, certainly newer players that come into the tour and they're just sort of starting out their careers and maybe sell their souls a little bit, and you look at them thinking, oh, I wouldn't have done that deal, but because needs must, and they're on the tour and they can't guarantee they're going to make X amount of money. Do you see that often?
Well, I do see it with some players. I can think of a handful right now, but I probably shouldn't drop a minute.
We'd like you to,
yeah,
for
I'm
our
sure
own
you
selfish
would.
purposes.
I'm sure you
can
would.
give us some clickbait.
But I do think I can understand why they would do that. The average tour player who gets their European tour card usually will keep it for 3 years. So they work their whole life for a 3-year window, basically. So I can certainly understand why they would try and max out as best they can when they do reach the cutting edge. But equally, some players will have a different view of themselves, and they won't look at themselves exclusively as a product. They'll start to look at themselves as a brand. And this actually ties in quite nicely to it's not a new type of sponsorship deal, but it's becoming more popular. So typically an endorsement deal is, right, you get paid a base retainer. There might be some performance clauses included in your deal. You get paid X amount of money over the lifetime of that deal, call it 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is, job done, contract expires, no more money from that company. What's happening now is equity share deals. Are you familiar with that?
No,
I'm not.
No.
Yeah, we're starting to see, this is really more at the top level. So guys like LeBron James would do this, or some musicians that are on, like, super wealthy people. David Beckham is known to do this as well on a couple of different projects. But equity share basically means rather than being paid to endorse that product, you become a shareholder for life or until you choose to sell it. So those deals might include an upfront payment to the player in order for them to sign. And then they would then take in shares of the company. And in recognition of that, they obviously market that to their audience, and then that business grows and stimulates because you're a shareholder.
So it's kind of like box office splits that you get with actors, for instance.
Very
like when
similar.
they don't take a fee, they just take 10% of box office, whatever.
You got it. Exactly that. And that's now becoming a lot more common at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds over the next 10 years, because I think in the wake of this pandemic, there's probably going to be quite a lot of startup companies, and there's probably going to be a fair few that'll actually end up doing really well. And what they may need is, because this is actually, I'm getting into something actually that's quite intrinsic that I've been researching a lot the last couple of weeks. But what you're going to find is, as these companies emerge, they're really going to need to amplify the audience in a big way to take it from one level to the next. And if they're going into, IPOs and things like that, having the backing of like a Rory McIlroy or a LeBron James as part of your shareholding is a really powerful place to drive up the price at the point of IPO. So all of that is super. I don't want to confuse everybody on this conversation.
you just reminded me of Golf Pass. I was just thinking Golf Pass all day.
Right.
Yeah, but that's a huge example, though, isn't it? Like, if you look at Golf Pass, like, what is that without the backing there of Rory? Well, again, outside looking in, not involved in the marketing of that, but it loses a certain je ne sais quoi, doesn't it? I think without
it does.
without him there.
Yeah.
Just to jump on one thing you said there, that it's interesting that you mentioned, and I know I'm conscious taking a lot of your time up, so
Cool, keep going.
I'll make it short and sharp. But you mentioned performance clauses. How cutthroat are companies in saying, if you drop out the top 100, this happens?
I wouldn't say that they would be cutthroat. I think everybody understands where they are in the world, to be fair. So no one, I think, gets emotional about those types of things. But when I'm referencing performance bonuses, I could be talking about winning a tournament. Winning a major would be worth a different amount than winning a WGC versus Rolex versus regular European Tour event. Then you can have like top 5 positions or end of year order of merit positions. If you're in the top 10, it's X amount. If it's top 20, it's X amount, and so on and so forth. Now, one reason why some companies really like insurance bonuses is because it's insurable. So the risk is actually fairly minimal-ish to a degree, but also can generate amazing ROIs. So I'll give you an example, and we'll just use easy numbers just for reference. So if you took out an insurance policy for £1,000 for X player to win a tournament, and the payout should that person win is 10 grand, what you can do is you can incentivize it in both directions. So in the contract, you might say the performance bonus, should you win this tournament, is £5,000. So they've spent £1,000 for the policy, they win, then they get 5,000 back, and the player gets 5,000. So
That's
everyone
insane.
wins.
It's kind of like just gambling on your player, isn't it? Really?
Kind of. I mean, not everybody will do that, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's definitely it is definitely possible to be creative in terms of insurance policies in that way. And that's what players, like if I was a developing player now, and this is some of the stuff that I suppose if I'm being honest, I'm learning about right now in conjunction with McLaren Sport and CF Sport. I was on this amazing call with these guys that do all this research on the data, and they provide the data back to insurance companies and, analyze risk in performances, etc. And there's no doubt that if I was a young player, I'd be seriously considering that. So you could speak to Billy Big Boy at the golf club and you could say, let's do an insurance policy. I'll back myself because I think I'm a good player. I'll back myself. You pay for these insurance policies. We'll split the profits. Yeah. Why not?
Just add a bit more leverage. Why not? It's a bit more excitement as well in there, isn't it?
I mean, I'm being quite simplistic, but you see the point. Yeah.
It's also, going back to my previous point, it's an easier proof of return, isn't it? Than just saying, stick your insurance company on my hat and we'll see what happens. If they tangibly getting a split of the winnings, then it's definitely easier. Yeah,
that's right. So I just think it's quite an interesting way to do it, because it's not, this is where, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure this out, what I'm about to say. So I could be way off the mark, and hopefully somebody doesn't pick up on this and go, hang on, I need to sue him because he's off the mark there. But, if you think about what betting is, anybody would go along and place a bet, and that's what would happen. This is a little bit different because this is a lot more about a calculated risk element you're insuring. It's part of a sponsorship agreement. This is much, much more different. But because it's not associated to gambling and it's not betting per se, this is a business arrangement. Therefore, the business is more likely to actually make the payment. Whereas you can't ask the CEO of whatever Billy Big Boy company and say, hey, listen, do you want to place a bet for £1,000 for a 10,000 return? You're just not going to do that. Oh, yeah. So this would form...
It just helps you structure it in a way, doesn't it?
That's right.
Just to maximize the outcome that I think you're going for.
Exactly that. And I think that's quite valuable for young players who are trying to find their way. I mean, at the elite level, it's different. A lot of these big brands that are, like your TaylorMade, your Adidas, Callaway, there will be some contracts that they'll probably insure, but largely they'll self-insure. They'll have enough data, and I know this from first-hand experience, they'll have enough data and information to know how much they're likely to spend in bonuses for the following year. So they'll just keep the money to one side in the bank, and then as they unfold, then they'll pay out the bonuses accordingly.
One of the things I wanted to ask about as well, Daryl, you kind of, in the world of business where the market is opaque, you have intermediaries to act, don't you? That's the crux of the business. And in a world of ambiguous marketing arrangements and sponsorships and all the stuff we've just spent the last sort of 45, 50 minutes discussing, you're there to help maybe decode some of that stuff out there. How easy is it? How transparent is it for businesses to understand the value of a player or a person in the golfing or sports industry and their value within that? Am I right in thinking you guys did a bit of work in terms of ranking and impact and presence and all that sort of stuff fairly recently?
We always like to know where our players are, what they're doing well at, what they're not doing well at, and then being able to create the narrative that will help a brand. Because we're quite key about, we understand that in certain parts of sports management, for example, it can be murky, especially in the world of, say, football. It's very murky. It's called a dirty business in certain places. When I set this up, and speaking to Jez, one of my business partners, he's on the board of the English Football League, so he knows all about the dirty money of football, really. And listening to him and being exposed to that and understanding it, one of our key things was 100% transparency. Never lie. Never be dishonest. Always help. If you're helping, you'll always win in the end anyway. So for us, we do like to make sure that whatever we're saying, we can back up with enough evidence to be able to prove what we're saying. And we'd never say anything that would mislead anybody. That's super important. The golf in particular is a small industry. You tend to know everyone. And you have access to everyone, even if you might not know that individual person. You will have access from what's that one? Well, they have a phrase.
Rule of six, isn't it, and stuff. You're right, though. Like we're even learning that. I think in the short time we're, kind of doing this stuff over the last year.
Yeah.
It is a small industry that's heavily connected through small numbers of people.
So it's not worth your reputation to mislead. And to be honest, I don't think I could sleep at night. You know, I've always been a guy, and Trotty will probably attest to this, and I've got myself into way more hot water than I ever should have. But I'm quite outspoken, probably because I'm from South Africa and I should be robbing cars for a living. But because I'm South African, I'm quite blunt, I'm quite direct, and I just say it as I see it sometimes. And especially when I was in regular employment and I worked for somebody else, that didn't always go down very well. So I've learned the hard way about that, and I've definitely learned some hard lessons. But that's why I just feel like it's just not worth the effort to really get into confrontational environments like that anymore. But that's going back to your point, you know, in terms of analysis and research and data. Yeah, we do look at this. We want to know average views. We want to know, media valuations of certain posts, et cetera, et cetera. And it's funny, we're just entering into an agreement now with a company called Zoom. You guys should check this out. Zoom do social media specific analytics, but they do it in the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, and we're basically going to bring them over here to do whatever they need to do on this side of the pond. But for us, just being able to use their software to be able to specifically analyze media valuations for social media is powerful for us. And it comes back to what you said earlier, Tom, where we can then go back and give a report back to those brands and actually showcase the ROI from a social media standpoint. Now, these analytics are around, like they're very accessible. I'm not the only one that's going to say this, and any agent or player manager that listens to this podcast will know, oh yeah, that's nothing new. But what is known is how expensive they are to access. And that is kind of a big burden when you may be dealing with low-ranking players, because the price of those things is it's not worth buying based on the sponsorship that's being negotiated. I'm not sure if I've answered a question there. I don't even know.
No, I think you have. And you've been very giving of your time. And I've got one more parting gift that I think you can give our listeners. So, you know, a lot of people out there that listen to this will have their own social media profiles. They'll have their own. Some of them are trying to build communities around what they do online linked to golf, and it doesn't have to be selling a product. It could be anything, right? But, you know, you see a lot of entrepreneurial people out there, I think, in the golfing world, and it feels like a really vibrant place at the moment. And, you know, just in terms of how you see people kind of setting up these different things, and the pandemic, again, you know, probably one of the benefits of that. What would be one of the sort of biggest advice you could probably give to people who are looking at building, whether they're in the business of content creation or whatever it might be, for how they market themselves better?
You must have a mailing list. There you go. And I'm going to tell you why. Because you can have a more intimate relationship with the people that are following you if you have a mailing list. And we're doing quite a lot of work on this at the moment with our players and just getting a whole bunch of things lined up for this. But I'm going to give you something really tangible, and I really, really wish that every single social influencer in the world is listening to what I'm about to say, because maybe it might help them actually benchmark their pricing. But when you do an Instagram social media post, the value of a view is 4 pence. That's what it is. The value of a sponsored post on a mailing list is £1 and 2 pence.
Really?
So,
wow.
Surely you should have a mailing list.
That's incredible when you put it that way.
That's maths I can't even do. That's a lot more.
That's most maths that you can't do, Tom, to be fair. You just stick to editing, young man.
No, that's a huge difference, isn't it? But
yeah,
is it not?
That's the intimacy, isn't it? That's the
intimacy.
I would assume that. I mean, as a person who gets peppered with spam in his inbox, and no matter what I do, it still tends to arrive. A concern I would have about a mailing list is that, am I starting to piss these people off? Is that not something that sort of happens?
Yeah, well, everything that we would aim for has to have a value message attached to it. So there has to be a lot of value that you're giving. So just give it. Just give the information. Give the knowledge. Give, even like on our mailing list, our top section is a tip about sponsorship. So I'll just tell somebody about how that works, or marketing, or whatever it might be, and try and make it as tangible and relatable to the person viewing it. Lower down, every week somebody asks me a question, so we put a question in there and I answer their question for them. Then there'll be stuff linked to totally other sports or within golf, and we have a news section that directs people to those platforms so they can learn about what's happening in the business of sport. Amongst that will be a dedicated section that says this post is sponsored by, and it could be whoever it might be. And that then allows the opportunity for them to actually engage with that post because they've already engaged with the rest of the content. And they're reading it more intently. So long as your email isn't, hey, I've got a new offer, is this, give your time, do some value. And I appreciate for tour players, it's actually quite difficult to do. Social influencers is much easier to do. Like even down to say Chris Ryan's mailing list, for example, he has a section there that he says, right, hey guys, this is what I'm up to. There's obviously lockdown, it's emotional, blah, 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 blah. Then we'll have his latest YouTube video in there. There'll be a section, some screen grab stuff related to some tips he's given on Instagram. He has a section in there to fill out his survey so that we can he keeps learning about his content that he needs to deliver, but we learn more about the audience and their behaviors, their buying behaviors, so that we're able to pitch the sponsors in the right way. Oh, and there's also a sponsored post for TaylorMade or Golf Buddy or, MapPay or Elegant Golf, whatever it may be that'll go into that section, which helps engagement.
What I think is the case across all social media platforms is that ultimately, if you want to grow and you want to grow organically and you have to provide quality, informative content, and that's the crux of it, because it's not easy to do all the time. It's really hard to just keep giving content, isn't it?
You're so right. You are so right. And Chris said it best to me one day, and when he said, I thought, you're right there. If you look at YouTube in particular as a platform, there's only two reasons and two reasons only to go onto YouTube. One is to learn something, like, how to put down the pram because you haven't figured it out and it's annoying
or
you.
Hear about the history of Kilspindie Golf Club.
Or that
would you say maybe, Daryl? Or
plug.
That sounded like a sponsored post to me.
No, crikey! I would never sandwich self-promotion material into this podcast.
Naked commercialism, right there.
You wash your mouth out with soap and water, young man.
That's going to cost you. But yeah, they'll go onto social media to learn something, or they go onto YouTube to be entertained, whether it be to laugh or, to whatever it might be with some of the YouTube chat. That's it. There's only two reasons.
Yeah. I watch our tour film. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
You were disgusting.
So long as you're providing value on those 2 points, great. Rick Shields is 100% in the entertainment camp. So everything he does is entertainment. Everything Chris Ryan does is in the education camp. Neither's wrong. You just know where your lane is, and you've done that. Going on to pitch out different businesses in inauthentic ways is not a very good way to do this. So coming on to your point, so long as the content meets one of those two criteria, you can't make bad content.
And I think on that bombshell, I think that is an absolutely brilliant time to say thank you, Daryl. You have been phenomenal guest, extremely informative. Sam's been writing everything down. We're going to be a social media empire by the end of this. So Daryl, thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I wish you all the best in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I've really enjoyed it, and let's do it again sometime.
Sounds good. Absolutely. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, fellas.
This.